Hi, everyone. Welcome. It's so lovely to have so many people here joining us for a Q&A with director Nitzan Tal. Nitzan is the director, hopefully, of the documentary that all of you have already seen called 8,000 Paperclips. And I'm just going to read a little bit of a bio of Nitzan, and then we'll get into a little bit of a Q&A about the documentary and about the creative process and all of those things. And all the while, if you have questions for her, if you want to add them to if you want to put them in the chat, or if you're able, we can have some time for an open Q&A that you can share directly. So Nitzan Tal was born and raised on a kibbutz in Israel, and her artistic bend, maybe she could trace back to her grandfather, who gave her her first SLR camera and darkroom equipment, which sparked her interest in photography, which would eventually morph into other forms of art and videography. She studied veterinary medicine in Israel and then moved to the States right before the year 2000. And she was, during her time in the area around New York City, took classes in photography while practicing as a vet. She studied at the New York Institute of Photography and the International Center for Photography. And in 2008, she established a photography studio here in Closter. And her work is documentary in style with an emphasis on the human condition. And she's a special interest in the work of nonprofit aid organizations and donates her time and services to NGOs around the world. Her first film documentary was called It Takes Balls, the story of an actor who likes to portray women. And she wrote another one had another documentary called Writers Matter, about a nonprofit working with inner city school children in Philadelphia, and 8,000 Paperclips, which is the reason that we are all here. So Nitzan, thank you so much for being here, for joining us.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you want to say anything first about the film, or I can just go into my questions. But first of all, what inspired you to take on this project, to take on this documentary, and how did you connect to Rafael and also the Come True and Become organization?
Okay, so it all happened by chance. Nothing that was planned. In the end of 2015, November 2015, I was just finishing my previous film, Writer's Matter, and didn't have another project in mind. And I got a text from somebody I know, and they said somebody that they know looking for a videographer to go and video a project in Uganda. Am I interested? And to me, it was like, wow, Africa, I've never been. Of course, sounds amazing. Yeah, how can I talk to this person? So I scheduled a phone conversation with Rafael for the next day. And he told me about his project with the refugees. Basically, that was already after the first part. So the first part of the project where they built the sculpture he did with another cinematographer, a videographer,
Wow.
And then he was planning to go to the Jewish community in Uganda, and he was looking for somebody to document it. And he sent me a TV program about the refugee children, about the group, which I didn't know much about. I haven't been living in Israel for years, so I wasn't that aware of the deportation and everything. And I was hooked. I mean, I started watching the program. I right away went looking for the tissue box. I was so touched by these children and the stories. And then, you know, by the time I realized that there's no budget, and actually I was expected to pay my own way, for the trip and everything, I was so hooked. I knew that I'll never forgive myself if I wouldn't go. And I had doubts. I mean, Rafael on the phone sounded kind of like, well, he's an artist, I guess. Has big ideas, a lot of things that he wanted to accomplish. Everything had to be like exactly the way he wanted. We were at the end of November, and he wanted to be there for Hanukkah because he really wanted to have a candle lighting ceremony. And I'm like, Hanukkah is in 2 weeks. That's not enough time for me to, yeah, it's fine. We'll be okay. We can do it. So I was really nervous, but I decided that I'm gonna go. Everything was way too interesting. And so that's how it started. I went there for the week. I didn't think that it's gonna turn into a movie. Then when I came back, a couple of months later, he was invited to present the project at a New Americans Museum in San Diego, which is also in the film. And they wanted to show a short short film about the project together with the work of art. So I edited with my editor friend, we edited a 26-minute film about the origin of the sculpture. And then I kind of left it for about a year. I didn't touch it. And then I don't know, I kept thinking that there's a much deeper story here. That there's a lot of questions that I want to touch that I thought were very interesting, and I went back to it. I traveled to Africa one more time. I did a few interviews with Raphael in Israel, and that's it. It's been a long project.
Wow, so it really has been a long time coming, both to produce and the project itself is a long thing. So from start to finish, how long was this project? Your involvement and Raphael?
Yeah, about 4 years. So I traveled to Uganda. It was beginning of December of 2015, and we completed the movie, November 2019. So 4 years.
Wow. So when you were last in Uganda, you caught up with some of the children, who I guess they're not really children anymore. They're young adults now. Yeah. What are they up to?
So the group is mixed. The children, obviously the ones I talk to are the older ones, but the group is mixed. There's children as young as 7 years old, and the older ones are now turning 22, 23. They're in different places. So unfortunately, some of the children that are in the movie, like Tedo and Veronica, they did not graduate high school and they left the project, and they're now living in Egypt with their family. The refugees again, basically when they were deported, when the families were deported to South Sudan, there was nothing there for them. There's just no infrastructure. So most of the parents just became refugees again. Some of them stayed in South Sudan, some of them are in Uganda, some of them are in Egypt or Ethiopia or wherever they thought that they can have better chances of surviving. Some of the young adults, Ramkel is still in school, Victoria just graduated high school, and I'm helping her apply to universities. She's trying to apply to a university in Kenya now. We're trying with a COVID-19, things got a little messed up, but basically the plan is that she'll apply either in Kenya or Uganda, and then maybe we'll try and get a scholarship in the US. But the project is ongoing. They have around 200 children now. They have, with the younger ones just in elementary school, and yes, the older ones, some of them are going to university. Some of them are back, I don't know, with their families. And a small group actually was able to go back and complete their studies in Israel. The one that A few of them were able to get a visa as a foreign students in Israel. I think 5 of them, and graduated high school in Israel.
Wow. So first of all, thank you for sharing that. I'm glad that it's good to hear that you're keeping up with some of them and maintaining those connections over the course of so many years. Can you tell us a little bit? You're obviously quite familiar with the situation of the South Sudanese refugees in Israel. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on? One of the challenging and confusing parts, and I'll admit this even for myself, when watching the documentary, is about the refugees who were deported. And I know refugees is a complicated term. They weren't technically refugees. Some were deported, but many of them were still in Israel and are still in Israel. So can you tell us a little bit more about that situation?
Yeah, so the South Sudanese community was deported almost completely, because the reason that they were deported is that when South Sudan gained independence from Sudan, basically, officially, the situation that caused them to be refugees was supposedly resolved. So the Israeli government at the time used it as an excuse to deport them, and they deported about 1,500 people. But so there's not that many South Sudanese that were left in Israel, but there's other refugees in Israel, other African refugees from other countries, Eritrea, Nigeria, Ethiopia. The Israeli government for the last, I'm not sure, I think 10 years or so, basically is not giving any refugee status to anybody. So they're not examining, there's international law says that if a person comes to a border and requests a refugee status, the government, there's a process that it has to be examined by the court, and the court has to find out if they have a reason to fear for their life in the country. They're supposed to get a refugee status. The Israeli government is not doing it. So they're allowing most of them to stay, but without a permanent status. So once in a while, they take them to like a holding place. I wouldn't call it a jail. I don't know what to call it, like a camp. Sometimes they try to encourage them to leave by giving them all kind of incentives and also making their lives harder in Israel. But, you know, I'm not a politician, and there was a reason why I didn't get into it in the movie, because I really didn't want to, I just didn't think it's my place, so I didn't want to get into the politics and the reasons why this is, but this is a situation in Israel.
We have a related question. I don't know, Leah, do you want to ask your question yourself, or you can just read it out loud? Okay, so Leah asked, do you think this movie will change Israeli immigration policies to allow more refugees, or I guess any refugees, to enter?
No. I think that everybody in Israel is very well aware of what's going on, and they have their opinions already. The only thing that I can hope for is that the people that are somewhat sympathetic towards the refugees may feel stronger about that. I'm very doubtful that a film like that can really change the minds of people that really don't want those African people in Israel. I doubt that that's going to happen just as a result of one film.
Well, so then I guess that brings us a little bit to some of the questions that you touch upon in the film and in the framing of the film about, and especially thinking now in that first sort of question about the relationship of art and politics, right? You said you didn't want to get political, although inherently there's something political about, I would say, about the work, even if it's an emotional type of politics. I'm curious, why do you make a film like this if you're concerned about, or if you feel like it's not going to affect politics?
I basically wanted the film to present a question, and the larger question is about art, and it's about the role of art in healing, in connections. I think the story is a lot about the connections. The refugee children, I mean, the connection that they made in Israel when they lived in Israel is what saved them when they were deported. The connection of Raphael to the children, as they still in contact, my connection to the children, the connections that were made with the Jewish community. I think all of these points of contacts are very, very strong. And I think all of us, each one of us, when we have that kind of a connection, we grow from it, we learn from it, we get something from it. So I think that's, I mean, to me, it was basically a curious question with a lot of interesting points. As I said before, I'm not a strong believer that one film can change people's mind, unfortunately.
It looks like Deli has a question. Deli, do you want to unmute yourself and ask?
Sure. So, what was your biggest challenge for this film? I mean, obviously beyond budget, was it working with Raphael, working with the kids? Did you have a lot of challenges with government permit? I mean, I know you need some sort of permits to go into these countries and do these films.
The permits and paperwork wasn't a big deal. I mean, vaccines and stuff, but nothing. It was fine. As the people from the organization had a lot of experience with going back and forth, so they helped me. Yeah, well, two main challenges. One, the work in Africa. It's tough. I mean, the conditions, I went by myself. I didn't have anybody to come with me. And, with a small budget, I couldn't pay for anybody else to go. So I was carrying all my equipment and setting up and everything. Of course, kids were helping me. Ted was always my assistant. I was also practicing photography with my camera. But the conditions were tough. And for example, one night, I thought I was charging my camera batteries. We wake up in the morning and I realized that there was no electricity overnight, which is not unusual in Africa. But now I have camera with no batteries and I don't know what to do. So our host, Yoash, I went to him and I told him I don't know what to do. I'm really stuck. I mean, we have a whole day ahead of us and I don't have battery. He said, no, that's okay. Come with me. He took me to a market stall, which is kind of like an electricity store. So they have a generator and like 100 wires on the floor, like extension cords. And you give them your charger and your batteries, you pay like, I don't know, less than $1. They give you a receipt and you come back 2 hours later and you pick up your charged batteries. So these are some of the interesting challenges of working in Africa. And Raphael, yes, Raphael is not an easy person to work with. As I mentioned before, he has very strong opinions and ideas, and he's not very flexible. So actually, to be honest, the first week in Uganda was tough. I mean, we got into some arguments, and it took me a while to warm up to him. I think only the last day when we were traveling back, we were kind of like starting to connect better. I learned about, I didn't know ahead of time, like about his history with mental illness. I learned about it on the last day, and that kind of like, that was a connection between us because my father had mental illness also. So that was kind of like, it kind of explained to me a couple of things. And then after that, when I came back, we kept in touch. We were talking on the phone a lot, and we still do. And I discovered, yeah, not an easy person, but a fascinating person with fascinating ideas, and I enjoy talking to him. And sometimes, I'll be honest, sometimes we talk or during an interview, he says something that to me sounds weird, like I don't even get it. And then I listen to it again, and I'm like, oh, wow, that's very interesting. So yeah, but we're good friends now. We're on good terms now.
Great. And another question from a congregant: have the kids seen the documentary, and what do they think of it?
So I showed them. We see it in the movie. So I went there when it wasn't completed yet, but I showed them some parts with San Diego. That was for all the kids that were there that day. The full movie as it is now, it wasn't screened for them officially. We actually were talking about it, and then with COVID now, they're not at the school. But I sent it to the children, the one that I'm in contact with on Facebook, Victoria, Christina, Tedo. I sent them the link, and they all watched it, and I think they like it. They say they do.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. Similarly, do the children from the documentary, have they maintained a connection with the Abu Udayah? Outside of, there were those, those facilitated interactions, but has there been any sort of extended connection between those two communities?
I don't think that there was any other official visit. When I was there the second time in 2018, Yoash and his family came to visit the school, and they watched the film with us. I think some of them are still in touch through Facebook and Messenger. But I don't think, I wish we could go back and go there again with some of them. That would be amazing.
Yeah, maybe one day. Another question, the documentary spans both many years and also seemingly many projects, and many different attempts at creating community. So I'm just curious, why did you call it 8,000 paperclips? It could have been called, it seems to me, any number of other things. And obviously it's a striking title, but I'm curious, what is that the centerpiece of the film? Is that, how did you guys come to that name?
Like I said before, I think that the main theme is the connections, and that's why I like the paper clips, because sometimes it's pretty much at the beginning of the film, Raphael talks, one of the girls is asking him why paper clips, and he tells her because paper clips represent connections, and they're so fragile, but when you connect them together, they can also build something much bigger. And I liked that idea because I think that's an idea that goes, through the movie. So that's why.
So now to go to some of those, like we said, some of those deeper questions. What is the role of art in healing and dealing with trauma. What did it look like for the South Sudanese? Do they reflect on it in that particular type of way?
Yes, well, I think for them, a lot of it, it's hard to differentiate what part was the art and what part was just the team project. Um, the whole situation, the boarding schools, the education in Uganda, I mean, here in the US, kids have art classes and all kind of projects and youth programs. Over there, it's very different. The schools are very strict, very straightforward. You study the material and everything. It's not, there's not a lot of, they're not very open to self-expression. I asked them actually in some of the interviews if they have any art education. They said no, it's not. They really don't have a lot of ways to express themselves. So I think in that sense, it gave them something that they don't get to experience much in their everyday life. So that's about the art, and also the visit to the Abu Udayah community, which was less about art and more about the connection, but they all came back from there with a feeling that they helped somebody, that they felt so good about being able to volunteer and help somebody else. They were talking about like how much they would like to continue to do that, to find other opportunities to volunteer. So I think that the entire project just gave them strengths and gave them some experience that otherwise they couldn't have. And the same thing for Abdallah in San Diego, which was, you know, the third leg basically of the project. It was just like Charlene says in the movie, it just gave him, it gave him confidence. You could see that he was a different person. So I believe that art has a power to change and give people a meaning. Raphael says in the movie, art is about choices. A person that can choose what he wants to do, how he wants to do it. And it says in like refugees many times don't have any choices, or just being forced to do things. So I thought that was a very interesting idea.
Absolutely. So you, on your website, you actually raise a number of interesting questions, mostly around this question about the usage and allocation of much needed resources, and in particular the efficacy of using significant financial resources to do things like create an art project, as opposed to, you know, paying for food and water and medicine, etc. And so I'm curious if you can speak to that tension and how that tension came up. Was that ever named by the children? You know, how do you feel like you handle it in terms of the context of the documentary?
I think it's hard not to think about it when you're in that kind of place in Africa, and you see the poverty and you see the need. But so that was, to me, a question that I felt when I traveled there, and I know how much it cost me to travel and everything, and I was thinking about it, like, was it even justified? Wouldn't they benefit more if I just gave them the money that I just spent on air travel? And Raphael has the same doubts. To be honest, it's very hard to answer. I don't know. I don't know the answer. I think it's a very interesting It's an interesting question, but I don't have a straightforward answer. I think it's very hard.
Certainly, and obviously the film does, and if you haven't seen it, you should. It does go into some of those questions, especially in Raphael's interview, I guess. He raises a number of those questions himself. There's a question about where were some of the children born in Israel, or
Yes, yeah, not the ones that I interview, no, they all came to Israel at a young age because they were older. But yes, some of the younger children in the project were born in Israel, definitely. My parents are sponsoring a brother and a sister. They were both born in Israel, yes.
Great. Are there any other questions from the community? If you're watching on Facebook Live, you can also comment on Facebook Live, and we'll try to read off any questions there. But I want to see if there's any other questions that anyone wants to ask. And in the meantime, while we're putting it out there, putting our feelers out there in case anyone else, is there a question you think that we should have asked you? You know, is there a question that you want to answer that you felt like hasn't been asked yet?
Wow. No, I think you covered, and I mean, to me, I think the film speaks for itself. I mean, I think that I raised my most important ideas and questions in the movie, and yeah, I don't have answers to all of them. I don't claim to have answers. I think the debate and the thought has a benefit on its own.
Absolutely. There's a question from Delhi. Is there a hope that the art project will travel to other museums in the future?
Yes, Raphael is working on it. Raphael is trying to promote it in different places. He also would like to continue the project with the children. So to travel again to Uganda and do other projects either with, well, it's probably not going to be the same ones that were there before because it's been years, but with the younger children.
Right. Then I guess my final question is, what's next for you as an artist, as someone who's interested in humanitarian work and NGOs? What's the next project?
I don't have a very specific answer, but I really want to do something that will have to do with mental illness. Because of my family connection, that's something that I'm really interested in. I was talking to Raphael at some point, maybe making a film about his story, which is touched on very, very briefly in the film about his screw sculpture, but that's an amazing story. He traveled with his screw all over the world, in the Europe and the US and India, and so that's a crazy story. So that might be.
Oh, well, looking forward to whatever is the next project, the next documentary. We'll make sure to hopefully invite you back in person to to share and to have another experience learning and talking with you. I just want to say again, Nitzan, thank you so much for sharing with us your film.